There's an expression, you know, at a certain speed, you have no friends. That car and you are a solitary package. You have to rely on that vehicle being properly prepped. And you have to treat it right. You can't do anything too fast. It has to be slow but measured. And you have to pay attention, you know. You can't have any brain fade.
Driver that I admire, Hurley Haywood, Robinson, Redman, Scott Pruitt. I've never had so many really, really world-class race car drivers blow me away about talking about VIR.
This racetrack has got personality from the past, from the rebirth.
From my standpoint, it's got to be the top one or first or second road course that I've been to. Sort of like going to Augusta National, more or less.
To me, VIR is a track for real racers.
There's been a lot of times where VIR has scared me, where, oh.
It's a fast right-hander blind, and I'm shouting, brake, brake. Well, he didn't brake till the last minute, and it was too late. Got on the grass, the wet grass, boom, into the tyre barrier.
It's a world-renowned sports car track, one of the stalwarts of American sports car racing.
I always thought it was one of what I thought were the 4 best tracks in North America.
Drive it the first time is like, oh my God, it's like, can we race here only?
VIR stands right up there with all the great tracks in America.
In 1989, a family from Alton, Virginia, leased a patch of farmland from John Foote to use for cattle grazing and agriculture. It maintained this status for the next 10 years. However, 32 years earlier, the property had been leased for a somewhat different purpose.
You know, you get asked often, what do you love about racing? And I think of it as 2 parts. There's the driving and there's the competition. And the driving part, the sheer satisfaction when you get it really right, when you finally get that corner perfectly. The racing is different. That has to do with beating people. And obviously, some of that's a lot of fun.
Road racing started pretty well at the time when the cars were first made, you know, back in the early 1900s.
I always told people when the second car was invented, that's when racing was invented, you know.
Of course, at that time, there were no tracks of any kind, and so racing was always on the road. And that continued in Europe until quite a late date. The fastest, most dangerous track in the world at that time was Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. It was 8 miles, and it was just a road, you know, through the country. And the Targa Florio, which I was lucky enough to win in 1970 in a Porsche 9083, was 44 miles per lap and 700 corners per lap.
Road racing was a European thing. And in Europe, when they started car racing, they had public roads. Nobody had a racetrack. In America, they started at country fairgrounds, which most all, I think, had dirt ovals for horses. And as the two sports evolved, that's the path they followed. So when they built a racetrack in Europe, it simulated a road. Here, when they build an oval, you know, when they were up the pavement, simulated the horse racing track.
To me, racing encompasses everything that life is all about. It has its challenges, it has its rewards, it's dependent on people. It has great growth of technology. I mean, it really blows your mind as far as what you can learn and constantly learning. So it's never easy. It gives you some rewards that you have earned. It doesn't give them to you, but they are there to be had if you do the right stuff. Everything that I've learned in racing, I've used in life.
You know, I grew up with it, don't know any better, I guess. It was just one of the deals that I think I could do a lot of it by myself. So it felt like I was accomplishing something. Whether you run good or bad, you had a lot of control over what went on.
I think it's the personal challenge within yourself. You're only racing yourself and how far you can go. It's going into your own fear and your own insecurities. There's an intimacy, there's a connection with your fellow competitor. There's a satisfaction in that it's hard to find anywhere else. It's just exhilarating.
After the war, then all the boys come back from overseas and fighting and stuff. Our form of racing really got started. They started with modifieds, took liquor cars and made race cars out of it. And then in '49, they started racing what they call stock cars.
Everybody's looking for something to do, whether it was in America or in Europe. And so racing started up again, mostly on roads still. But soon, you know, the dangers presented themselves, such as at Road America. In Wisconsin, it was through the streets and through the village. And Watkins Glen, same thing.
There were what were called SAC Air Force bases. Lots of car races on them. The tracks often been marked by barrels, 55-gallon drums. I can't imagine anything more boring than standing on an airport runway and watching a lot of guys way out there drive around barrels.
I can teach just about anybody to drive a really fast lap, but I can't teach people on how to be a racing driver, how to look at a situation like in a chess game. You're 3 or 4 steps in front of where you're actually moving at the moment. And that's sort of what racing is. And I really enjoyed the challenge of putting that all together, not only apart from just going fast in the race car, but also being fast in a race car with a plan of attack.
What I love about racing, the sheer driving, I think, is number one, and just the purity of just driving. I like pressure. I think, you know, it was my grandfather's, I remember him saying it, but if you have pressure, it means you have something that you're playing for, and it means like you should be lucky that you have that pressure, because it means you're playing for something big.
I believe there's no other sport in the world like it when it comes to what you're putting on the line and the level of adrenaline that you're producing. When you're performing something that you truly love to do in front of a crowd, and when you are able to win, there's nothing like that feeling, because Everyone will tell you there's way more days when you lose than when you win in racing. So those wins are just super, super important.
It's an absolute mind transformation for you. You could be dying of cancer, getting divorced, and filing for bankruptcy. And when you strap into your race car and are driving at the limit, all of those worries would go away because you're 100% focused on what you're doing, the task at hand. There's no other sport that I know of where you're so alive in the moment and so in tune with what's going on with the car and the track and the competitors around you.
And I think the other lesson that racing teaches you is to be in the moment. And this is something that we need to do in life, right? Because we're worried about the past or the future, and we sometimes miss where we are right now. And with racing, your situational awareness in your moment and it being present is really important because you're scanning what's happening in front of you, where you're going, who's behind you, the sense of choreography with the other classes of how to work together, using the faster cars for a pick so you can get around someone that you're chasing, and that dialogue on the track I think is so fascinating.
It is almost like a dance because you're always kind of evolving and changing and reading the other person. In our case, it's reading the car.
Every lap, there's something new to look at. You know, the conditions are changing, whether it be the weather or there's been an incident on the track and there's some debris. The mindfulness of it, in the sense of being present, is an incredible feeling. It's such a high. And I think this is why people talk about the addiction. It's that.
Racing got started here and there were some real problems, accidents like the Watkins Glen. Most racetracks, the road racing tracks you know, got built all within the same couple of years.
I think it was a really magical time, and you know, certainly 55 was a very deadly year in motorsport.
What happened, obviously, people were hurt, people were killed, by cars that just went into the crowd. There was no crowd control. Road courses, like Virginia International Raceway, came from that.
A group of lunatics like myself conned some poor soul to put up the early money.
There was Ed Welch and Dick Snyder, Hooper Johnson, Ed Ken, and George Arnold, who was married to Preston Foote, the daughter of John Foote. George said, well, we could go look at this farm. Preston was also interested in sports car racing, and so she eventually talked her father and uncle into leasing the land. They went up to the farm and they drove the course in the field, and that's what laid down the track. I mean, that was the route that they wanted the track to take.
It was really at the height of motorsport of that generation. It was really growing so rapidly. Tracks like Elkhart Lake, similar mentality of how it started. Before they built the track, they used to run through town, and they just sort of, okay, how do we make this track similar with a bulldozer? Like, once again, it wasn't created by a computer. It was just created by these guys that just, here's the vision, here's where we want to go.
The thing that makes VIR amazing, it was built for lawyers and engineers. It was fun how they really worked with the landscape.
Because they didn't have a lot of money, they weren't able to move large amounts of dirt. Most of the track was built as a result of the natural topography and whatever obstacles existed. If they couldn't easily take them out of the way, they'd go around them.
Fellow Dick Snyder had a Mercedes 300 SL. And we said, Dick, wind it up and see how it turned down here at the end of the straightaway before you get, there wasn't no woods out there then. I said, get down there, just turn, come back the other way. So that's his turn. That's actually horseshoe bend is Snyder's curve is what it is. So we started back up, and there was a big ditch right back here. I mean, a big ditch. So we decided we better get away from the ditch a little bit, and we started turning to left there, and we looked, and they were all hills. And Ed said, well, we don't want to go over the hills, let's go around. Okay, so we went around the turn, and we curved back a couple of turns, and then we went right straight up. It goes just about straight up to the oak tree.
The oak tree was just too bloody big and too bloody expensive to go around. You didn't want to go in front of it, because that meant if you made a mistake, you could run into it. So they went around it.
And the radius of the tightest corner on the racetrack, the Oak Tree corner, is the turning radius of the bulldozer that they use to lay out the circuit.
They really built a racetrack with the seat of their pants. know? It's like, it scared the hell out of me. Great, pave it.
It was 27 feet wide, and the reason why is because the Barber Green, the blacktop machine, is 9 feet wide. If you have 3 passes, you got a 27-foot wide track.
The racetrack was solid, certainly initially. A foundation that was put down from gravel that was dug out of the Dan River nearby.
They didn't change the topography. They didn't redesign around the topography. They accepted the topography as part of the racetrack, and they did things that we all did in the 1950s. We made the best of what we had. Big money did not come into racing till much later.
I mean, those old tracks, when we talk about VIR, a certain generation of track that wasn't designed by a computer, but it was just a bunch of guys with a bulldozer going, we're gonna go here, and let's turn around that tree, and we'll go straight for about a mile, and then maybe we'll go down this way to slow everybody up.
Bridgehampton was much the same way. They couldn't afford to make it any different than it was. At VIR, if it was a hill, you dealt with the hill. And that's what road racing's all about. Road racing is dealing with the landscape that you have at hand, not making it into something it's not.
Those tracks, to me, have the most soul, and I think that's what's so amazing about VIR is the rhythm of the track, the elevation change, the risk-reward factor. If you go off in certain corners, you're gone. That's your race.
Thank goodness they didn't have a lot of money to start lowering hills and raising valleys, because then it would just become, a billiard table where it looks like a paperclip. There are people who just design these paperclip-looking tracks, and there's nothing dynamic about them, That place, you're not only racing yourself and racing the people next to you, front of you, behind you, but you're racing the topography.
A wonderful way for happenstance to create an amazing place. After VIR closed its doors and the vehicles stopped running, there were numerous reports over the years of outlaw races occurring on the property by college students and other racing enthusiasts. Neither law enforcement nor the property owners reported any such incidents, and there were no accidents or injuries during this time. Eventually, the track fell into such disrepair that any racing, outlaw or otherwise, was no longer feasible.
The first race was in August 1957. They had several races, depending on the class of car that was entered. The very first race was won by a fellow named Ed Hugas, who was driving an Alfa Romeo Giulietta.
I was a track announcer back in the early 1950s, and I was asked to come down here and be the announcer of the very first race in 1957, and I gleefully accepted. Road racing in those days was just getting started, and it was quite an experience to come down here and see the size of it, 1,200 acres, the beautiful winding around, and the fact that there were no grandstands. Everybody walked around and went from turn 1 to turn 5.
The main race, the one that everybody came to see and everything, and that was won by Carroll Shelby in the Maserati 450S. He had come from the West Coast with the John Edgar team.
We had been racing mostly on abandoned airports all over the United States up till then, and there were very few really decent road courses, and VIR was one of the first ones. It was a beautiful setup, a little hot that day. I really looked forward to racing the 4.5-liter Maserati on this circuit because I'd only raced it 2 or 3 times. And I knew it was a fabulous car, but this was the first time that I'd been to a place where we had the straightaway where you could really let it out. I was very lucky to be in the 4.5-liter Mazda that was so much faster than the Jaguars of Briggs Cunningham that I didn't have to work near as hard as I would have if there had been 4 or 5 of these Mazdas in the race that I would have had to compete against, so I could go easy on the brakes. If I'd had any real competition that day, it would have been a matter of who could save their brakes till the last 10 laps.
VIR was kind of a unique place. It was out in the country. I think we had to drive through 3 individual states just to get to the racetrack.
VIR was a little bit on the primitive side because they didn't put a bunch of money into it.
It was like a cow field through which they built a racetrack. There was really nothing there except, the big pagoda, a trench urinal, and a dilapidated old outhouse structure.
Well, if it rained, the infield would turn into a sea of mud. Wreckers had to pull cars back out, not broken cars, but just to get a car back outside the track to go home again.
It was about the same size because it was all dirt and it was grass. It wasn't uncommon that on a hot, dry period, somebody would come in, car hot, catch grass on fire. And then you'd have to get the fire department out.
VIR got a lot of press in '57. There were articles in Sports Car Magazine, and that brought in a lot of people from the Midwest and the New England area.
The famous guys who did it were in the very lexicon of the whole sport.
My first race was at Watkins Glen in 1969, a 6-hour. Peter and I, we won our class, beat all the factory Corvettes, and it was a really big deal. And I was sitting on cloud 9, man. This was like fantastic. Unfortunately, I got the letter from the military, and I was on my way to Vietnam. VIR was the first race I was in after I got out of Vietnam.
During my time racing at VIR, we competed against some of the top road racers of that era. Guys like Walt Hanscom, Bob Holbert, Peter Revson, and Dick Thompson.
John Greenwood was driving the Corvettes. Carl Schaefer was in a Camaro. Bob Beasley, who was driving the Porsches, was good. Toad Hall with Michael Kaiser was good.
Jim Fitzgerald, Wilbur Pickett, Dr. Wilbur Pickett. Janet Guthrie grew up in Long Island. She had a Jaguar XK120. So here's a gal in a big, heavy Jaguar. I said, holy jumping Jiminy. Janet had precision. She had a burn in her belly to prove a woman could be a fantastic race car driver.
To me, it's a gender-neutral sport. The car doesn't know the difference. The people are who know the difference. And to me, racers, once they know that you are as passionate and dedicated as they are, if your passion is strong enough and your results are good enough, you end up getting to hang around long enough.
I've raced all around the world in many, many different cars. I've done everything from Formula E to the Jaguar to NASCAR to IndyCar to sports car racing. People like Lynn St. James, Michelle Mouton, they opened the doors for the rest of us, just as we are opening the doors for the generation that will follow.
I'm racing in the IMSA Prototype Challenge LMP3 series this weekend. VIR is my favorite track I've ever been to.
I first went to VIR in 1959. It was often called Danville then. God, I remember it. I mean, you thought you were pulling into a farm, but when you got on the racetrack, my God, the track was wonderful. This was my first race in the Lotus 23 on a real racetrack. I had run a couple weeks before in a place called Marlboro, and then I went to VIR, and oh my God, what a joy. And I was on the pole, and I remember there was a Meister Browser, and on the first lap, coming down the straight that comes back towards the pits, this guy passed me, huge horsepower, and I swear the ground shook.
And it was challenging, it was scary, and some places it was daunting. It was so different than an airport course. It scared the bejesus out of me. On the airport courses that I raced on initially, you made a mistake and you just go down the balance of the runway that was being blocked by pylons. Here, if you made a mistake, you could pay for it.
One that I really remember was a Ferrari that ended up going off course and crashing into a tree. It was a racing Ferrari that are worth millions today. The car was written off, but nobody ever found it. So I keep looking in barns every time I drive up to the track, hoping to come across an old bet-up Ferrari.
First time we ever went there, July the 31st, 1966. We'd run a race at Nashville on Saturday night. Me, David Pearson, and Wendell Scott jumped on a little plane and they flew us back to Danville. So we'd go down to the racetrack. Never seen the race car, didn't know none of the people. Never been on a road course in my life. You know, we had a Plymouth Barracuda, was running against, I guess, Mustangs or whatever. Jump in there and I go racing with these guys. I was trying to keep up with the Mustang, and when I finally got out of the car, I was doing, I thought, pretty good job keeping up with them. Well, they were like a second and a half faster than what the Barracuda was. They didn't tell me that. They just told me go out and race. And, you know, you went by the start-finish line and made a right-hand turn, then went down through the woods, come back around somehow, come back by the deal. I think I spin out 2 or 3 times, get stuck up. I think I run, 10 or 12 laps or something. Finally got stuck up or tore the car up all to pieces.
2 other NASCAR drivers all went off at turn 3, which is a decreasing radius turn, so it gets tighter as the further you go into it. Well, they went off on the outside. There was a bit of a swamp there then, so a couple of them got stuck, and that turn got called NASCAR Bend after that.
My first race as a driver at VIR was in May of 1959. I drove a Porsche 550 RS in the SCCA National Shrine, but we earned a 5th place finish, and I knew I wanted another opportunity to compete there because it was a challenging and fun track to drive.
VIR is a punishing track. You're racing the track, you're racing the car, and you're racing the other people. Like, it's not just one element that you need to get right. The track is changing, how the tires are changing, how the car is changing, how the other people are also changing with the track and the car. It's a constant moving target. It's almost like it's alive. You know, the track's alive, the car's alive, you're alive. You're trying to meld all those things together to get the best result that you can.
Reasons that drivers really enjoy racing at VIR is because the course offers so much. From its elevation changes to its long high-speed straightaways to its combination of low-speed and high-speed turns, there's a lot you need to get right as a driver at VIR, and with the course following the natural terrain of the Virginia countryside, it's always been a beautiful place to race.
You also need to have a lot of guts to drive here because there's a lot of really ballsy corners. You know, it's got fast corners, it's got slow corners, it's got elevation change, it's got curb usage, and it gives you a feeling of satisfaction when you do actually get it somewhat right.
It's got unbelievably demanding corners. A 20-mile-an-hour corner is junk. A 150-mile-an-hour corner is junk also. The 80 to 120 are the ones that really do separate the men from the boys.
If you get into a corner too fast, you'll see the guy who isn't very good. You'll see it and go, wow, he spun off the road. You'll see another guy makes a big correction and he slides down the road. And then you watch that same corner for the whole race and you go talk to the guy who won. And he says, oh man, I almost bought it one time. It was awful. I said, I was standing there the whole time. I never saw it because you don't see it. The guy can cover it up and make it work right. And that's the difference, I think, between the really good people and the people who aren't so good.
Unlike any track that I know of anywhere, the first half of the track is very slow and technical, and the second part of the track, from the high-speed S's to the roller coaster and hog pen, are all high speed. So you've got 2 different setups in the car.
I remember going up the S's. I mean, you took a deep breath on the entry and just prayed to God nothing went wrong because it was fast.
You have to maneuver the car through a lot of turns. You have to be under high loads of braking, and then you have to be able to learn to do a lot of shifting. And you have to really know how to match your RPMs, your torque, and your shifting to maximize the power coming out of corners. You're busy all the time. You're either shifting, braking, turning. You don't feel like you're going straight hardly ever.
I learned very quickly that racing at VIR took a certain kind of driver. If you're going to race here and be successful, you have to have discipline. You have to have precision. You have to have patience. And the margin of error then and now is narrow. Almost as narrow as the track itself.
Okay, you're racing with a guy and you can go the same lap time as him. So how the heck are you ever going to pass him? Well, it might well be that you're better on one part of the racetrack than he is.
You must be patient. You cannot do things without analyzing the result. Do I wait just a split second before I make this pass, or do I make it with a 50-50 chance of making it? That's not good enough.
You have to set the pass up. And if you're faster than somebody in a corner, if you follow them right through the corner, right on his bumper, you haven't taken advantage of your superiority in that corner. And if you've timed it all right, you'll come out of the corner faster, pull over and pass him, not have to suddenly slow up because you're going to run into the back of him.
There are certain circumstances where the 50-50 or even a 20% chance of making it comes in, but you have to make that 20% to win the race. Then yes, you make it. But if you don't have to make that choice and you just wait just a split second, you'll make it up somewhere else.
From inside the cockpit, you can really induce issues to the car. Like Virginia really, I remember the throttle coming out of a corner, you can induce the front to slide and then normally the rear snaps. So you induce two issues that you wouldn't have if you just were patient and waited and let the car turn.
Boy, your line you better be smooth and perfect. You screw up one, you screw up a bunch of them. So it's a demand discipline, intense driving.
It's equivalent, I think, in some ways to downhill skiing through a course, through gates. If you're making the turn in for the ski gate, when you get to it, you're already too late. You want to turn in significantly before you get there so that when you're passing the gate, you're already set up for the next corner. And to a certain degree, VIR is very much like that. You have to be ahead of the course. If you're reacting to the course as opposed to being proactive about being ahead of the corners, if you have to react, you'll end up going off in the weeds.
Everybody makes a mistake. And it's how you handle that mistake.
The guys that don't have patience make the mistakes, and the mistakes cost time. You make a little mistake on the racetrack, and it takes time to fix that mistake.
You need a very quick reset button in your head. If you know you just lost a 10th in the last corner, the first thing you want to do is try to get that 10th back in the next corner. But a lot of times when that happens, the mistake compounds itself into the next sector. And so having that reset button in your head is very important. I had to work on that.
People talk about reaction time, but it's not just reaction time. It's no good reacting incredibly quickly and doing the wrong thing. And so it's judgment, good eyesight, the ability to judge speed, and of course, the will to win. As in any competitive sport, you've got to want to win, and that means sometimes you take extra risks.
The track will reward a patient and smooth driver, and it will punish you if you decide you could muscle it into doing something good for you. When Paul Rimbold removed the 5 miles of telephone wire and the PA system from the track, and the supports for the pagoda fell in, very little remained of the original raceway, except the track itself, which eventually gave way to nature. But nothing was left to indicate why a grand old lady of a racetrack, beloved by so many, had been consigned to nothing more than a forgotten relic.
The original owner was a corporation, I think it was Sports Car Enterprises of Virginia Incorporated was the name. When they ran out of money, Colonel Paul Rembold, who was the head of the Civil Air Patrol at the Danville Airport, took over as the leaseholder and the track manager. So he was the one that everybody went to in order to put on a race there. The key probably was the national championship points races that were held for SCCA national championship points. And they would hold them in the spring and the fall. And they would track anybody that wanted to compete in the national championship would show up for those. It got great coverage in the magazines, Sports Car Graphic and SCCA Sports Car and Auto Week. And then the SCCA's Trans Am Series, one of the very first races, happened at VIR. And that got a lot of publicity.
Probably my greatest memory of racing at VIR was the President's Cup race. I was driving a Cooper Monaco and we won the pole. I remember it was raining pretty hard throughout most of the race, and it was pretty difficult to see. Eventually the rain stopped, and over the last 30 or so minutes of the race we had a great battle with Walt Hanskin and Bob Holbert for the lead. Winning the race. That was my only victory at VIR, and I definitely had to work hard for that one.
Peter and I had agreed that we would do the first IMSA race at VIR, which was 1971, in this car. It rained really good, and the 914, you know, with having the engine toward the middle of the car was really good in the rain. And both Peter and I loved racing in the rain. We had definitely an advantage over, say, like the Camaros or the Corvettes or the Mustangs. They were just sliding around, and we had pretty good traction. And we won the race, and my commanding officer, who was a big sports car lover, had no idea that I was part of his troops at Fort Lee, and I got back to the campus and got a note that the commanding officer wanted to see him in his office. So oh my God, I'm in trouble now. And he said, I saw the race, you did a great job. We have to help you get out of here and go on with your career.
Came up here in the late 60s when racing was going on, and one of Harvey's favorite sayings, it was a long multi-day party and every once in a while a race would break out. And that's really what it was. Most people came up here to party. They didn't come to watch the race. Teenagers, you know, people in their 20s. There was a place called Spectator Hill where everybody went.
It was quite a party scene, and I think people who went to Spectator's Hill, the majority of them didn't care that a race was going on or not. They just wanted to come and, you know, be merry, so to speak.
One of the times I came up here, there was an old Volkswagen. Didn't have an engine in it. It was just the body and the tires. And, you know, what we do for fun, and I'll have to admit that alcohol was involved in this. For fun, we'd pile as many people as we could in the Volkswagen and let it roll down Spectator Hill. And then we'd push it back up the hill so we could do it again. Of course, this was in, you know, the streaking craze was just beginning, so there was, you know, multiple accounts of nude people running up and down the hill.
From what I hear, Spectator Hill was wild. I've heard that from multiple sources, both my parents independently included. He actually met my mom here on one of those weekends, and that's how their love grew into a marriage, and that's how it came to be.
If all the people who said they were conceived, you know, on Spectator Hill and at VIR actually were, then the population of Halifax County would probably be double what it is now.
Rumor has it also that MG was driving through the town of Milton with a naked woman on the boot, and they didn't much take to that. They had a temporary jail just over the state line as you left VIR in Virginia into Milton, North Carolina, where they would arrest all the party goers into the paddy wagon on the side of the road.
Things really did get out of hand. One of the buildings on the farm got burned down, and I think that was kind of the last straw with the owners of the property, and so for multiple reasons it was shut down. It was great while it lasted.
The Foote family closed VIR down in 1974, and I think they had just finally had it up to here with all the shenanigans going on out here. And I think the final straw for them might have been when purportedly the son of one of the go-kart promoters set this house on fire. So they didn't much care for VIR after all those happenings. And in fact, when Harvey negotiated the lease with John Foote, there's a clause in there that we are not permitted to have a Woodstock-style festival of any sort.
It got to be the attitude of anything goes. And, you know, when that happens, things are going to decline. In the days in the late 60s that I came out here, yeah, we had a great time, but we respected it. This was a racing center. We didn't want to do anything to bother the racing. That's why, you know, Spectator Hill was a bit removed. You could see everything, but you weren't in the way. People just kind of lost respect for what was going on out here, and, you know, them having a good time took precedent over what this facility was here for, and which was sad. It really was. But
I think the track was in really bad shape at the time. The people who were running it at the time did not put any money back into the track. It had really run downhill, so I think it was going to take a large infusion of cash to repay the track.
In the 70s, the gas crisis came. You couldn't get there, and if you had gas to get there, you didn't have enough money to buy expensive gas to race. So the gas crisis pretty much, together with rowdy period of time, they burned down the barn. They almost burned down the plantation building. Nobody was watching it. Nobody was writing checks. No one cared anymore, and now there's no gas. If you can't get there and you can't put gas in your race car, it's going to shrivel up, and that's what it did.
It was a guy named, called him Bitsy Cheney. He raised corn and over there for probably, I reckon, 20 years before we got it. We had that farm over there, I reckon, back in 1990, something like that. We were running cows on the whole thing. We had about 300 head, 300 brood cows. Most time we fed them down there on what was the pit road. Put corn down there one year, cut silage, stacked it up on pit road, the old pit road down there, and fed it right there.
in the early 80s, I took flying lessons out of the airport at Danville, just west of here. And we would practice emergency landings and what are called touch and goes on the racetrack straightaways. As long as the cows were out of the way, we could do that.
If you go back and look at the article from 1956, the plans for the track, they were great dreams, I guess, but it really took somebody like Harvey and Connie to make it happen.
I know the first time we met Harvey, the Foots family had told us that, they had a guy coming in from New York thinking about fixing the track up. We met up at Oak Tree then, Oak Tree Turn up out. And Harvey, he went on talking about all what he was going to do and, going out, he could envision this over here and this over here and how it was going to look. It's just like he already had it pictured, I remember looking over my dad, I was sort of looking, I was like, man, this dude's crazy, But, no, he wasn't crazy. If he was crazy, he's crazy like a fox,
I was vintage racing with SVRA, and we were starting to lose some of our venues. So I said, well, maybe we should get a place of our own.
Harvey was a good businessman. He was a good journeyman race car driver. Well, he was a developer. Harvey would take an old shopping center and resurrect it and rebuild it and reface it. So he brought business acumen to racing.
Bridgehampton was actually my first choice, believe it or not. However, even though it was a great racetrack and I had driven on it many, many times, the environment was just too hostile. Too much money that was going to stop me either by hook or by crook or by lawsuit.
I have raced against Harvey for 30 years. He raced a Elva Courier. I had a Fiat 124 Spider. Harvey is a very shrewd competitor, and he used to walk up to me on the grid and say, I'm going to beat you.
I looked at Marlboro, which was now a swamp. Looked at Thompson. It too was swampy. Vineland, it had been subdivided and part of it was a university. And then I stumbled upon VIR.
Harvey was definitely a unique individual. I think he could actually see that day of what it, the way it turned out. He was a man of vision, no doubt about that.
As I walked up with the owners with me, I looked out under the oak tree at the long, straight, the rolling hills of the Virginia landscape. Inside, my heart was beating heavily, thinking to myself, oh, what a beautiful piece of property. And outside, I said, it's pretty rough.
First time I met Harvey Siegel was in May of 1998. I was introduced to him by Peggy Burke, his right hand in property management and leasing. And she called me one day and asked me if I would come in and meet Harvey. He's put a property in Virginia under contract, a racetrack.
Well, once we entered into the agreement, then I needed to go to the planning board, of course, to get approval to do it.
I was sitting in my office, and this guy walks in, and he says, my name's Harvey Siegel, and I'm from New York. And I thought, well, there's strike one.
He sketched out VIR on a napkin, literally.
And he said, I'm a commercial real estate developer. And I thought, well, there's strike two.
There were actually cows grazing on the front straight the first time we came here. The hog pen was still up in hog pen turn.
And he said, I'm here to resurrect VIR. And I thought, yeah, right.
Going to the planning boards has been my life experience. Developing in New Jersey, developing in New York, developing in Connecticut. Generally, the process is painful.
He was probably the 10th or 11th person who'd been in over the years saying, I'm going to do something with VIR. And none of it, of course, ever panned out.
In New York or New Jersey, you needed a full set of fully engineered working drawings. Several meetings with preliminary planning boards for concept development.
There was something about Harvey. He made a believer out of you. And I was thinking, this guy may be able to do something.
Identify where the buildings are going to be, where the infrastructures of the roads, engineered drawings.
showing elevations of stormwater control, elevations for sewer, domestic water supply, fire water supply.
Harvey, to his credit, had done his homework.
It asks you to do an environmental impact study. It asks you to do a traffic study. It asks you to do a stormwater drainage calculations, a reserve and detention study, architectural review, site plan review.
One meeting with the Planning Commission, he made his presentation. We talked about it for a while. Planning Commission said, yeah, go with it.
And they go out and they're out about 10, 15 minutes, and they come back in. We've talked about it, Mr. Siegel, and we've decided to let you do that.
Short, sweet, it's done. The board said, you're approved, good luck.
And I sit down next to Connie. I lean over, I said, what does that mean? What does it mean? I don't know.
And I said, I think that did take Harvey by surprise quite a bit, because he's used to, months and months of process. And down here, we did it in a few days.
After 40 years of development under my belt, I had no oversight of any kind. The rest is history.
After we met with Harvey that day, it wasn't very long after that he got the ball rolling. I mean, got it rolling big time.
I had a war room, and the war room had a giant bulletin board on things that needed to be done. 10 buildings needed to be built, and all ready at the same time. And the track had to be finished. All the infrastructure had to be done. If you're going to open, you can't open with something missing.
First thing we started doing was clearing around the track, so you could get, get the layout of that. And we started clearing around that, and then first thing you know, we was grading for buildings.
Harvey used me as sort of a sounding board and also as a person to ask, hey, who are the subject matter experts? Who should I talk to about this? Who should I talk to about that? Where do you think the curb should go? Where do you think the corner worker station should be?
He would come up with stuff that you would think would just be plumb off the wall. And I know a lot of times we would go in that trailer over there and, Harvey would have everything. He said, well, this is what we're going to do, this, that, and that. And, I told him, I said, now, Harvey, that dog ain't going to hunt. And he said, what?
I don't think that dog hunts. That dog don't hunt. And so that became Harvey's favorite catchphrase.
If you drove on VIR before, when you got to the end of the blacktop, there'd be a little ditch. So you would drop down and go up like that. I knew I couldn't reinvent the whole track. There's 3.3 miles. So instead, we redesigned them. So essentially took that whoop and just expanded it. Now you accomplish the same thing, but when you got off, you didn't get yourself catapulted into the air.
She was narrow and tight now. I don't know, back in the day, they had the handful when they took them curves and all, as narrow as it was.
It was 27 feet wide. We needed to improve that to modern safety standards. We knew we'd need to get at least to 30.
I think we ended up adding 6 foot on all of it, and maybe 8 foot on parts of it, maybe, about 10 foot on part of it in the curve and all.
Any racer today knows that high-speed GTP cars can do an airplane imitation. So we took about 12 inches in depression out of the area just before the uphill at the end of the back straight.
If you wanted to get on Harvey's bad side, you take a tree down without him knowing about it. You didn't take a tree down without him authorizing it.
I am a tree hugger, I admit that. I decided that I would rather have it look like a national park than a racetrack. There are no overhead poles or electric lines. Everything is underground.
The goal was to preserve as much of the track as possible to keep the history intact. As Harvey used to say, you can't buy history.
The look was because I had gotten a sense of calm with the red barns, the sense of New England, the pastoral nature of the property itself lent itself not to be fought with by some modern structure to try to impose its style dimension onto it, but rather work with it, much like the historic nature of the New England look. If you could connect all the buildings with a similar look, then it would have a sense of unity.
Most people are racers first, and then they whatever else they do to make a living. And so I think that Harvey approached it from a different dimension, so to speak, that, you know, he's gonna make it into a country club, and he's gonna have a restaurant and showers that have hot water and toilets that flush. You know, it was gonna have pavement without potholes and grass that could be mowed, not mud.
Part of the inspiration came from a project that Roger Penske and Stein Erikson did in Deer Valley. They took very special care to make sure that all those little things that you would normally care about are taken care of. And I said to myself, I'm a racer. Why don't we have any place like that where I can take my wife and my family, if they need to use the bathroom, that there's a bathroom and air conditioned, that if we want to sit down and have food, it's real food and a place to stay.
Well, I think having like a motorsport country club is something that is very unique and really cool, because there's a lot of people that love motorsport and love racing, and they want a chance to get out and do it themselves, but also maybe bring their family along with them.
Well, that was the intention, right? It's a country club where people can go and enjoy their cars in a safe environment where they can have the camaraderie. And then, you know, there's the infrastructure in there where you have a nice day, where you can have a nice meal, you have a nice place to stay. All those things are really important because you're looking at the professional drivers and the crews. They're on the road for over 250 days a year. All those little things make a big difference. And you look forward to going back to tracks like that that have the infrastructure. It just makes it a better experience.
The original vision for the property, from Harvey's perspective, was a beautiful racetrack with country club type amenities where Sharon would want to come racing with him, his wife. And as we went to Lime Rock and Watkins Glen and other tracks and saw some of their operation, I knew pretty early on that that wasn't going to be a sustainable business model, that we could not be just a motorsport country club. We, being a historic track with lots of excellent history, deserve to go pro racing.
A long-time dream? A long-time dream. I always visualized that one day I'd be able to make a racetrack look like it's supposed to look, and do it with both the spectator and the participant in mind.
You have big plans here. What would this look like in a few more years?
Well, I mean, it's somebody mentioned that it looked like a national park. We don't want to make it totally a national park because it is a racetrack. But because it's a grand old lady of a racetrack and one of the most challenging and probably in the world, we felt that the family would love to come to a racetrack instead of a golf course, having a race course instead of a golf course. That way we could make everybody in the family enjoy the sport that I love.
It's a massive effort, and I shudder to think the expensive. The track is smooth, there's a lot of runoff space. When they get this finished, boy, it's going to be a landmark, I'll tell you.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't believe it. I thought it was, I don't know what I was expecting, really, but I was expecting this.
If I was about 60 years younger, I'd move here.
When I first saw VIR for the first time, when I got to the track, it's so different than really any other track I've ever been to. Obviously very green. Coming from the West Coast, it was the most green track I've ever been to. Seeing the track itself as you drive around, it was really thrilling.
I thought I was at the wrong place. I mean, it was gorgeous. There were real buildings there. The paving was good. I was really impressed.
After it was resurrected, a lot of the drivers came back, 99%. They praised the track very, very highly.
Well, it's a remarkable transformation here. Really beautiful job that Harvey Siegel has done. This will go down in history as one of the finest road courses, if not the United States, the world.
People that raced there in the 70s and went back in, say, the 90s, it was the same track. It just newer. You know, safety was an issue, and, you know, they took away the zones where you could get in trouble.
I remember VIR very vividly as probably the best racetrack, or one of the best that I'd ever raced on in the United States, and it still is.
I think VIR, as it is today, is one of the nicest racetracks we have in this country. And it can be used for any kind of racing and made a damn good place to have a Formula One race.
Very few tracks come close to VIR. It's something that, you know, you're out in the middle of the nature. Once you're there, you're secluded from everything. It's VIR.
They created an entertainment place out of a gigantic piece of land. You have the go-kart track. There are several hotels, if you want to call it, place to stay. And the racetrack in itself.
This place has got pieces of every great circuit in the world on it.
I would say out of all the tracks that I've driven, Spa-Francorchamps reminds me most of VIR, only because of the vastness of it and how much elevation there is, like how much commitment you would have in the fast, high-speed stuff.
When I think of VIR, I think of like Watkins Glen. If you go outside of the U.S., I think of a track like Mont Tremblant. It's been around a long time, Mid-Ohio. But I think VIR, in my own heart anyway, it stands above those in a lot of ways.
It's like a lot of the turns at the Nürburgring, which, as I mentioned, was 170 turns per lap, and a lot of them are blind.
The experience of being in VIR, it's very similar to be at a track like Mugello, you know, where it's planted in a beautiful area, but when you drive it the first time, it's like, oh my God, that's like, can we race here only?
The original course, the historic golf course, is 3.27 miles, and that is the outer perimeter of the racetrack. And Harvey had the great idea of bifurcating the track into the north course, which is 2 1/4, the same as Mid-Ohio, and the south course, which is 1.65 miles, just slightly longer than Lime Rock in Connecticut. And then later, we connected the cut-throughs to create the Patriot course so that you can run full and Patriot or north and south. Or you can run a combination of all that and have the grand course, which got nicknamed the Verbergring when Car and Driver was here doing their magazine special, and they said in their opening quote, finally in North America, there's a track worthy of the Nürburgring. It's the grand course at VIR.
Carroll Shelby said 1 lap here is like 100 at Watkins Glen.
So you're coming down for the drop of the green flag. At the little kink on the front straight, the flag drops, you got about a 100-yard dash down into turn 1.
As you go into turn 1, it's a hard brake zone with a really fast entry, but you have to slow it down and get it off the corner, so you struggle to put the power down.
There's different drivers take different lines through that corner, so it's not a one-line corner. It just depends on how your car's working and how your driving style goes. And then you come up to 2 and 3. 3 is another corner where it sucks you in just a little bit, and a lot of people go off the outside edge of that.
NASCAR turn, you come into what I call the stadium section where you see all the fans watching, and you enter quickly, and you enter with a bend, but then it tightens up just a little bit, so you have to dance the car on its nose.
But then you come off of 3, accelerate down straight, and then you got to just about stop for 4.
Turn 4 is one of the slowest spots in the track, and you have to be patient there, otherwise you'll miss the whole next section.
It is just as tight as heck, and you can't use the road there, because if you use all the road there, you can't take 5.
You want to stay on the left hand at the exit to set up for the next right, which leads into the snake.
Uphill S's are flat out. The car flies through the air. Sometimes you even lift the nose off the ground. And no matter how many times you do it, it's still a thrill every time.
Well, the S's are the most exciting, right? Because that's really, as a driver, you need to be flat and not lift, and you make up the most time, and it's exhilarating when you nail it. And if you don't, that's when you're going to lose a lot of position.
That's an example of if you're faster than the guy in those S's and you sit right on his bumper all the way through, you haven't accomplished anything. But if you fall back a little bit and come out of there going quicker, that's your pass.
We had the very fast S's and the super fast left-hander after all the S's down the hill right before the oak tree bend, right? That was such a wild corner because if you got off there, you were going on a serious ride down that ravine. And that, for me, was one of the corners that was like, whew, you better get this right.
You know, it's a corner that you have to give up the first run a little bit so that you can get to the outside for the oak tree, because if you take a normal apex in the right-hander before the oak tree, you won't get out to the outside in time to make the oak tree.
There's so many small details in Oak Tree Corner where, like, on the exit, there's just this little tiny divot in the curbing on the exit where if you just barely hit that with half of your left side tires as you exit, that's going to be your optimal radius going through the corner.
Your turning in the apex is right there. You got to get down next to the tree. So all those things have these beautiful little reference points.
It's a tough place to pass at the end of that straight just because you got that kink just before you have to turn right and go down the hill. People are going to use one side of the road to the other side of the road and back, and it makes it very difficult. You can make passes there sometimes, but we also have people come together there a lot.
There's an elegance to it. There's a rhythm to it. There's a way of racing with someone and knowing, okay, if I let you in here, then I can overtake you here. It's like a ballet. It's a dance.
There's a lot of give and take, so if you know somebody just did something to you that they didn't have to do, I'm the type of guy that's coming right back to them, so I think that's how you kind of earn your respect.
And you know where people are. You know who's who, and you know who you can trust and who you can't trust, who's an asshole and who's cool, and the assholes get weeded out pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's like the roller coaster. So I think it's turn 14 off the back straight. You have one of the best braking zones ever, and then you're just building speed, give or take, throughout the rest. It's downhill, it's somewhat blind, a lot of grip variation changes, and it's fast.
I find the place that I could get the most advantage on someone else is actually in the last combination of corners, because I could get on the gas really early with the way I took it and be able to get speed down the straight and make a pass just after start-finish line.
When I was 16, I was at a boys' boarding school in the north of England, and the headmaster called me into his study, and he said, "Redman, we can't teach you anything. I suggest you leave school." So I left at 16, and I had a Morris 1000 Woody traveller's car, and I delivered mop heads around the north of England at high speed, and decided I'd better get off the road and get on the track, and that's how I actually started racing. Kink series like this before the uphill. Well, we're going through that kink bit, and suddenly we go sideways. I turned to him, I said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, Christ," he said, "I was trying to see how fast it would accelerate." I said, "Wait till it's in a straight line."
I'm born in a village that is actually pretty close to the one just right outside VIR. I wanted to be a basketball player when I was a kid. I sucked. I wanted to be a soccer player. I wasn't good at. But the first time I sat in a go-kart, I was pretty good. In my life and my career, there was never a plan B. It was racing or cleaning the floor at the local McDonald's. 2004, just signed the contract teaming up with Scott. They told me, we're gonna go to Virginia International place. At the gate, I asked if we were entering a resort. The first lap I took there, I was like, how did we not race here before? I think I held the lap record. I set the fastest lap back in 2004 and it stood for a while. I was driving a Lexus prototype with which we actually won the IMSA championship in 2004.
I first started in go-karts at 9 years old. It's funny, like, people downplay those machines, but at that age, it's, those things are going 70 miles an hour, right? And then from there, as soon as I was legal to go to cars, I was at Virginia International. I had a couple podiums there, and I know that a win there helped propel me to win that championship. I remember it being extremely technical, and I remember you having to be very patient with the throttle, which is not good for me. But it taught me to be patient. Slower is faster sometimes.
It was part of the family dynamic really growing up because we'd always watch the Indy 500, Monaco Grand Prix, Le Mans, all the big races. And then when I first started dating my wife, she gave me a Skip Barber 3-day competition certificate, and that opened up the door. A few years later, I ended up going to Atlanta for a charity event and ran into Don and Dan Panos. And then I started racing the Esperantes, in the school that was there at Road Atlanta. And that's when it really was like, okay, now I'm in. I did their racing series and then slowly moved up and just got the addiction. I remember going off in turn 1 in the wet, and it slopes down, right? And once you hit the grass in the wet, you just pick up speed. And I went down over the hill, and I'm just sitting in the tires, and I'm waiting. I'm like, where is everybody? It's like, does anybody know I'm down here?
VIR was the very first racetrack that I've ever been on, and that was in a Mazda Miata. I remember it was just a track day. It was 2 days, just went out, had a lot of fun. And that track, I've had more laps at VIR than I've ever had at any other track. We were racing in a prototype there one year, and it was absolutely crazy weather conditions. It was raining on half the track, dry on the other half, and I was behind a train of 3 or 4 cars. We were going up the uphill S's and going into turn 10. First guy loses it, goes off track. Second guy loses it, go off track. Third guy, and then I followed because it went from dry as a bone to pouring wet, and you just didn't have any grip whatsoever. And there's like 4 or 5 of us going off at the same spot.
Before my minimum drive time, I had to drive the car. Boris was in the other car, and so when he got out, I got at the end, and we won the race and the championship. We didn't find out till we're at the banquet that night. He said, "Yeah, I was sick in the car." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I got sick," and he threw up. But during a caution, he threw up in his mouth and held it, drove around for another hour, and then when they had the caution, he lifts his helmet up out the window and spit it out the window.
I will never forget my Pro Mazda Series 2009, coming down the hill in the last corner onto the front straight. I restarted about like 5th or 6th, and everyone starts going on the restart, single file restart, and then they stop. And when I lifted off the throttle, I'm still it's that downhill, banked, kind of coming onto the front straight. And when I lifted, I did a complete 360 and saved it as all these cars are going around me. And I kept going in the middle of the straight. It didn't go yellow or anything, and I passed like another 10 cars into the next corner after I had spun. Complete 360, spun, lost like 10 positions or 12 positions, and gained like another 10 back into the first 2 corners. I think I still ended up on the podium.
In 2014, great race. I was just transitioning from Mazda to Porsche. Everything was really working so smoothly, felt really confident. Getting back to qualifying, really pushing final lap, really aggressive going into the final corner, lost the rear end of the car. I was braking a bit too late, lost in, and just slid down the back. And with a Porsche, of course, the engine's gone, transmission, everything has to get rebuilt. I just felt so bad. I was like, shit, I'm putting the team in a really bad situation here. It looked like we were gonna have a really good qualifying, at least on the front row, and I blew it. You know, I was just too greedy and made the mistake. We had to bring in an engine from Atlanta. Guys worked all night long, got the car ready for the start of the race. We started at the back. I remember reading this book called The Champion's Mind about sort of the mental approach to sport. And when you make a mistake, there's a chapter about letting that go and moving on. And I was like, okay, now I need to make this up. And I just really focused on, okay, what do I need to do at the start? Where do I want to be during the start? And I just ran the whole race in my head. And then the race starts, and I just picked up the rhythm again. I let go of the incident in qualifying. I could just feel everything working in the car. And I was ahead on every corner. I had my eyes up. I was really focused, and we ended up finishing on the podium. That was one of the best races of my life. It was a real turning point. I think starting with John Wright and those guys, and my whole level of racing changed, and focus changed completely.
You know, to dream something that you really believe in and spend some money, but most of the time your hard work, energy, and your intellect to try to achieve your dream is a very noble and exciting and satisfying kind of endeavor. Because without dreams, half the things on the planet wouldn't have been done in the first place. So to dream big, why not? If you're going to dream, you might as well dream big. Might as well shoot for the moon, you know?
Harvey took something that was really rough. We know that there were cows grazing on the straightaway and broken pavement and, you know, ramshackle buildings. And he built the showplace. There are few motorsport facilities in the United States or the world that can rival that place.
I always knew that I wasn't the owner of VIR, even though I was the redeveloper of VIR. Connie and I knew then and always did, is that we're simply custodians of an amazing place. History will show that others will take not ownership, but they will become a custodian during their lifetime.
I think VIR, for spectators, for drivers, for families, it just offers everything. And I think the people that run the place are at heart themselves the racers. And so they bring their passion every day. And the fans feel it, the drivers feel it, everyone that's involved. This has become more of a culture than a racetrack.
You can build a racetrack, but you cannot build emotions. And they've been able to create tremendous emotion out of a piece of land that, who knows, if it would have been just cow pasture.
The thing that moves you most about VIR is the history. When you think about it, and when you make the approach and you go down through the gate and you're driving down into the paddock, I've always flooded with memories of the past and images and moments where I wish I could go back. Being at the first race in '57 and seeing Carroll, Shelby and all the legends of that era. And then could you be a part of that history? Would I be able to make my mark and be a part of it?
You've got a handful of racetracks in North America that evoke emotion. You look forward to coming here. It's green, it's lush, it's a cool track. It has history. Some tracks you get goosebumps driving into, and I think that's one of them.
VIR is nice to be told about. VIR is unparalleled when you live it and you experience it, because there's, no matter which way you turn and look, something's going on. You know, you want to see cars running 180 miles an hour on the straightaway, you can. Walk over to the next little area and you see cars doing S-curves. And the whole gamut of racing experience is here.
As a race fan first, as a race competitor second, as a person who loves the sport as much as anybody else in this world, it is wonderful to know that someplace like VIR exists.
Well, there's so much pride in the track and the resurrection of the track and bringing it back, and the hospitality, in the kindness. Everyone you come in contact with, the people that are telling you where to park or where you can't park, and that consciousness and culture is so important. I remember the driver meetings that we would have at VIR before the race, and the camaraderie and all of that. I would always look around and just be so grateful to be there, to be a part of it for this moment in time. And it feels like you're coming home.
If you have a view in your mind on what it should look like, and nobody second-guessing you, and you have the opportunity to do it the way you believe it should be done, you can then say to yourself, wow, if I weigh the pros and cons of each one of these decisions I make, and then when I make it, go with it, then you have an opportunity to have something that has a cohesive, totally consistent sense of beauty, sense of purpose. And that's what I think VIR turns out to be.
I think the heart and soul of VIR comes from the heart and soul of everyone who has graced it over the years. Whether it was the original constructors and the racers who made it famous back in the day, to everything that Kerrigan and I are working on today to continue the legacy that Harvey restarted. It's just been an amazing journey, and we try to engage every person that comes in, make them part of the VIR family, the legacy, and it's almost like it's got a heartbeat of its own. I mean, you just can't come here and visit and have a fun day. You come here and take some of it away with you, and you leave some of you behind. It's just the way it is.